Friends, I'm happy to announce that Straight Talk has partnered with Blue Line Roasting Company to bring you delicious coffee to enjoy while you listen to this podcast. Blue Line Roasting Company also serves our first responders by giving a portion of all net proceeds to numerous organizations who support them. Order today at bluelineroasting.com. That's bluelineroasting.com. And don't forget, when you join the Straight Shooter VIP Club, you receive a free coffee sample and a mug, plus invitations to private podcast events. I don't believe you should have to go through hell and high water to register to vote, but I don't think you should have to go through hell and high water to purchase a firearm. Well, folks, it has finally happened. Welcome to the Straight Talk Podcast. I'm your host, America's Sheriff David Clarke. Yes, President Donald Trump has finally been indicted by the New York State District Attorney, but that should come as no surprise to anybody. So we stand here today having watched the complete dissolving of our republic by left-wing American-hating people who have gone to great lengths to destroy not only Donald Trump the man, but the 70 million people who voted for him in 2020, and not to mention the millions who elected him president in 2016. As I see it, Donald Trump was denied his duly won opportunity to govern the United States of America. It's when we first began hearing of this thing called the deep state. Remember that? That band of unelected career bureaucrats who saw Trump as an impediment to their control of the federal government. You see, this deep state consists of not only career bureaucrats, but it includes longtime career politicians of both parties. Yes, that's establishment Democrats and Republicans, because they're the ones who invented the lie, the hoax, that Trump colluded with Putin and the Russians to steal the 2016 election from Hillary Clinton. You may recall they used this fake dossier to obtain warrants in an unprecedented move to spy on Trump's presidential campaign. You remember top FBI agents that hatched, and this was found in text messages, they hatched what they call a Plan B in the event that Trump won. That, folks, was a silent coup that nobody was held accountable for, by the way. On top of that, these goons orchestrated a 2-year special investigation to keep the lie going, a lie that hung like a dark cloud over Trump's entire first term. It was a distraction that Trump had to continually address as he tried to set up and run his administration. And you know who was behind this as well? The left-wing fake news media. They were the vehicle of this insidious attempt to keep a dark cloud of suspicion over a duly elected president. And you know what happened when they were done? After they squeezed all the juice that they could out of the Russia-Kalusia orange, they just tossed it away like a piece of trash. And then remember what happened after that? COVID struck. Because you remember that the Democrats had nothing to run on for the 2020 presidential election. America had been restored to greatness under President Donald Trump's leadership and policies. The slogan, "Make America Great Again," had been forged into the American people's narratives. Then these same rat bastard people that have been trying to destroy Trump saw an opportunity to use the pandemic as a political weapon to whack Trump over the head with. Another career bureaucrat, remember his name? Anthony Fauci. He actually became the de facto leader of the deep state. This a-hole lied to the American people from the beginning about the cause and origin of the virus and how lethal it was. Remember that? Now, the fact is, this could be deadly to people with compromised immune systems, but so can the seasonal flu. And they weren't bringing that up. Then they implemented economy-destroying policies developed on Fauci's faulty advice. Government bureaucrats started assuming power not allowed by the United States Constitution at the federal and the state level. And unfortunately, instead of asking more questions, we simply acquiesced like sheep. And now, in looking back, shame on more of us, including me, for letting fear that was created intentionally to control turn us, or I should say, let me put it this way. Those fear-based policies became a control mechanism, and it consumed us. Remember how all this started? Shutdowns were ordered by government that were only supposed to last for, remember this, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It was all about making sure that hospitals weren't overwhelmed. So we did that. We're good people. But then 2 weeks became months and then years. Everything was shut down from schools to restaurants to businesses. If you remember, we were forced to wear masks over our faces and social distancing became a thing. Fauci told us to cancel Thanksgiving, Christmas, and other time-honored traditions involving gatherings like funerals and weddings. People couldn't even give their deceased family members a proper burial. The government even went so far in some states to set up hotlines for people to turn their neighbors in who were in violation of family gatherings in their homes because they had a lot of cars parked in the driveway. They were turning Americans on Americans. And if you remember, as time went on, a vaccine was discovered, and in record time, go figure. And then we were lied to again. This wasn't a vaccine, it was a therapeutic. We were not informed of the side effects. They kept that secret. And remember that even children with healthy, functioning immune systems were forced into getting the jab. We were lied to that if you took the shot, you would not get COVID. And people, for the first time in the history of this republic, were forced to inject something into their bodies that they knew little about. Yeah, the government, the same people who were supposed to protect our rights, shredded the Constitution and told us that we had to take the vaccine or we'd lose our jobs, or we'd be shamed and shunned. We were called anti-vaxxers. Remember that these government officials, they even toyed with the idea of requiring vaccine passports to be carried in order to get into public places. Remember that? Then Trump lost the 2020 election. And by the way, I will go to my grave believing that Trump won that election after getting more votes than any incumbent president running for re-election in U.S. history. I don't have to prove that. Biden and his ilk have to prove to me that he won. Because too many irregularities still exist that have never been satisfied. Therefore, I think, this is just me, it's legitimate for me to believe that the 2020 election was stolen. And even after that, it wasn't enough for these deep state totalitarians. These same bigots, they needed Trump's complete destruction to make sure he didn't mount a comeback. And they wanted to show his supporters what would happen to them if they continued to push for a self-governing republic. Recall that Trump reminded us. He said, They're not really just coming after me. They're coming after you. And you know what? Today they still are. These deep staters then used January 6th as a ruse to disregard the tenet of things like due process, our Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments to the Constitution. Those were shredded too. Social media became a proxy for the federal government to stifle our free speech. And corporations got into bed with the deep state, and they began turning over information on people doing business with them. The IRS had become weaponized to go after taxpayers. And it's important for me to bring all this stuff up because we have short memories when it comes to this. Yeah, it seems to have culminated in the indictment of Donald Trump, but it started long before this. Some of you may know that in order for a totalitarian takeover to occur, you have to do two things. You have to control the media, and you have to take away the people's guns. Yes, you have to disarm the people. And that's coming next. And if you don't think so, I think you're dangerously naive. Among other things, our system of justice has been hijacked and weaponized to go after political adversaries. So this Trump indictment, it's not the first example of it, it's just the latest. We now have political prisoners in the United States of America. I never thought I'd see that. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? Can't just sit around and bitch. You remember that after the signing of the U.S. Constitution, a woman asked Benjamin Franklin as he came out of the meeting, "Sir, what have you given us?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." So the hour is at hand. We've lost this republic, and I'm sick and tired of people saying, we're close to losing it. We lost it. The question is, what are we willing to do to get it back? You notice all these know-it-all intellectual elites are putting out op-eds at a furious pace. Everybody's taking to social media to rant. They think this is fighting back. I think it's a joke. You know, this is not what the founders of this great republic fought for. This is not how they fought. They started a revolution. And generations that came after, looking to secure the freedom handed to us by them, took to the streets. You've heard me say that too many people think that this can be done from a safe space of their homes, a think tank or a TV studio, or calling a talk radio program. It can't be won that way because that's not the battlefield. It can only be won by taking to the streets. You recall me saying that? Mass protests will get these dirtbag bureaucrats and establishment elected officials' attention. And not January 6th style either. That wasn't organized, well-planned, or serious. I'm talking about building a critical mass of people first and then taking it to the streets. You know, I've talked about how Dr. Martin Luther King did it. He took the civil rights movement to the streets. He took it out of the churches where it started and sermons, and he took it to the streets. Remember how the Iraqis handled their tyrant dictator, Saddam Hussein, after he was captured by U.S. forces? Remember that? He's turned over to the Iraqi people who tried and convicted him under Iraqi law, and they sentenced him to death. He was hung in a public square. That was retribution for the people who died and suffered under his reign of terror. And I suggest the same thing happen here to all of these tyrants, beginning with Fauci. These people need to be rounded up, tried and convicted. I'm a due process guy. And upon conviction, these people should be fed their last meal and face a firing squad on prime time television. Let that be the message that we send to these tyrants who are currently terrorizing we the people. So my challenge to you is this, folks. When does the second revolution begin? And if not by us, then whom? And if not now, then when?
Follow Bulldog TV on Facebook to join the fight against communism in America. A growing community of patriots are joining together to take back the media. Bulldog TV, Americans fighting for America.
You talk about race, crime, and politics. Some folks lose sleep over this, but not me, because I sleep just fine on my Giza Dream Sheets and pillow from My Pillow, especially this new 2.0. If you haven't gotten yours yet, you are missing out. Just go to mypillow.com and use promo code Clarke, that's CLARKE, and save up to 66% off. The direct link is also available on my website, americasheriff.com. Get a great night's sleep so we can continue the fight. You're listening to the Straight Talk Podcast. I'm your host, America Sheriff David Clarke. Next thing I want to talk about, and this is, you know, if you go back to the first podcast, I read an op-ed that I penned called Wanted New Conservative Fighters, and I talked about what's going to be necessary moving forward if we're ever going to defeat this nonsense coming from the American left. It's political warfare, and that's what it is. And I talked in there about, you know, a new type of fighter for the political conflicts of the 21st century. And in there, you know, I talked about, here, I'll just read from it. Somebody needs to tell these Republican intellectual elites that the other side is shooting at us, figuratively and literally, as in the case of Congressman Steve Scalise. In this new age of political warfare, they've allowed the left to dictate the rules of engagement. I went on to talk about, in that piece, that the new conservative fighter has to rid themselves of their self-righteousness about the kind of tactics they will have to use to take on the left's machine. For instance, taking the high road is an ineffective tactic against this foe. You want to go back and listen to that one. First podcast, I set it up. Remember, I said, this is what this thing's going to be about. I presented the framework for the Straight Talk Podcast. So then I come across this, and this is all over this flap about President Donald Trump potentially being charged by the New York State prosecutor, Bragg, for some made-up charge. You know, the left has politicized our Justice Department to go after political foes and political enemies and political opponents. And we kind of seem to be okay with it. Yeah, I know, we look, we read, oh, this is terrible. Oh, this isn't right. Wow, this isn't fair. Look what they're doing. That's one of those ineffective tactics that I talk about. That's not going to work. So Trump kind of sounded the alarm by putting it out there that they're thinking of indicting him soon. And of course, that became the news of the moment. Remember, I said, you know, it just moves on from one thing to the next. And it has no staying power. So, you know, I monitor this stuff, obviously, right? I come across this story, again, Yahoo News. No, it's not my favorite. It's actually from Business Insider. And the headline says, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy say Americans shouldn't protest if Trump gets indicted. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Representative Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene both said on Sunday that Americans shouldn't or don't need to protest if Trump is indicted. Quote, I don't think people should protest this, no, McCarthy said, adding that we want calmness out there. These comments diverge from Trump's earlier calls for people to protest. Take our nation back, Trump said. Both McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene said MAGA supporters shouldn't protest even if Trump is indicted in New York. Trump Saturday called for Americans to protest and take our nation back if he's indicted, claiming without evidence that he would be arrested on Tuesday. But at a Sunday press conference, during a House Republicans retreat in Orlando, McCarthy urged people to remain calm. Let me stop there. Why does he feel a need, I find this insulting, to tell Republicans and conservatives to remain calm? When have we not? And don't hand me this January 6th crap anyway when a couple hundred misguided people trespassed into the U.S. Capitol. There were over 100,000 people that gathered in Washington, D.C. on January 6th to listen to Trump speak. And they didn't riot. They didn't protest. Well, it was protest, but they didn't go nuts in the streets. We don't have to be told that. So back to the story here, it says, quote from McCarthy, I don't think people should protest this. No, said McCarthy per NBC News. And I think President Trump, if you talk to him, he doesn't believe that either. How does he know what Trump is thinking or what Trump means? Trump speaks for himself. And he speaks in unambiguous terms, which is one of the things I like about him. So McCarthy adds that he believed Trump simply wanted his supporters to educate people about what's going on. Again, insulting. What do you mean, educate me about what's going on? I and every one of you know damn well what's going on. This is a political lynching. It's a political witch hunt, and we shouldn't tolerate it. And we shouldn't put up with it. And yes, we should take to the streets in a peaceful fashion. And let this kind of behavior by this politically active prosecutor in New York City know we're not going to put up with it. We know exactly what you're doing. You've weaponized the justice system to go after political opponents, people who oppose you. You know, up until recently, January 6th, we've never had political prisoners in this country. We're not like some third world nation who jails opposition forces. Nelson Mandela comes to mind. Jailed for what, 23, 24 years? Because he wouldn't keep his mouth shut about the evils of apartheid? We didn't do that here up until January 6th. And yes, I claim those people were political prisoners because they were not afforded due process. They were held in solitary confinement, no bail, not given access to the evidence, and not allowed to speak to lawyers. Those were political prisoners. And I don't care what you think about what they did that day, they're entitled to due process. And they didn't get it. They're political prisoners. So now they're doing it with Trump. And it wasn't just McCarthy. McCarthy goes on to say, if this was to happen, we want calmness out there. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene gets in on the act. And it says here, the Georgia Congresswoman and diehard Trump loyalist tweeted on Sunday evening that MAGA supporters don't need to protest any possible indictment. Now, here's what I want to get at. Why is it that it's always us meaning conservatives, that have to give away and give up our constitutional rights, and the left never has to? There was not one Democrat leader during the riots after Mike Brown, after George Floyd, and any other police shooting. There wasn't one Democrat leader that stood up, including Obama and others, Not one, not Pelosi, not Schumer that said, don't go in the streets and riot. The rioting's unacceptable. They stood silent. And if they said anything, they referred to the rioting as protest and talked about how it's a time-honored tradition in our country, and it is. Why do we have to give it up? Why would these two, and I like Marjorie Taylor Greene, the jury's still out on Kevin McCarthy, why would they tell people to give up their First Amendment right? These are supposed to be conservatives? Protest is a time-honored, God-given constitutional freedom, constitutional right. Why do I have to give mine up? What are we afraid of? You don't trust conservatives to get out in the streets and protest peacefully? We've shown we can do that. It's the left that can't do it. When the Dobbs decision came down that overturned Roe v. Wade, I didn't hear one Democrat leader stand up and say, don't take to the streets, don't protest this, we don't think it's necessary. Not one. In fact, matter of fact, they did the opposite. They told their people, protest this, take it to the streets. Here's why it's important to take this to the streets. Like I said, you cannot do this. You cannot defeat this foe from inside a think tank. You got all these Republican elites, writing for all these so-called conservative periodicals, writing op-eds. That's not an effective tactic against the left. Appearing on all the cable news shows. That's not an effective tactic. Trying to do this from inside a DC cocktail party. That is not an effective tactic. Protest is an effective tactic. Ask Dr. Martin Luther King. Until he took the civil rights movement, it started inside the church where he was preaching, and he eventually knew if he was going to make headway in this fight for civil rights, he was going to have to take it to the streets. And he preached peaceful protest. And once he took it to the streets, it became visible, and America watched in horror as law enforcement disgustingly sick dogs and fire hoses on peaceful protesters. And that changed the tide in America's support for change in terms of civil rights. It wasn't happening inside the church, ladies and gentlemen. They had to take it to the streets. And I'm tired. And the same thing happens with the Second Amendment. I'm tired of so-called conservatives and Republicans, and those are two different people, always asking and willing to give up our rights. Well, I guess we could strengthen background checks. No. We don't need to. Well, I suppose we can limit magazine capacity. No. You have so-called conservatives going along with this crap. After Uvalde, Mitch McConnell told Senator Cornyn of Texas, get together with 16 Republicans and sit down with the Democrats to come up with something here because people are calling for gun control. And at the time, they did the trick that I talked about earlier in the podcast. The left runs out and does polling within hours of a horrific event when emotions are high. Do you think we should do something about gun control? And they get like 70% of respondents say yes. Then when they're polled like 60 days later, guess what? The numbers flip. And like 65% say, no, we don't need to do anything with the Second Amendment. See, because emotions have settled down and calmed down. And now reasonableness enters into the equation, and people are able to clearly think, yeah, this isn't really about gun control. But we're told, don't exercise your First Amendment right to protest. Don't exercise your right to free speech, because we don't need that. What are they afraid of? Yes, we do need that. We have a right, a God-given right, to approach our government and have our grievances addressed. And yet these two, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy, are telling us, don't exercise your First Amendment right to protest. We don't think that's necessary. The hell it isn't. That's the only way we're going to get their attention. Peaceful protest. It's the only kind that we actually do. It's the left who's changed the meaning of the word riot, and they call it mostly peaceful protest. No, it's not. It's a riot. And that isn't First Amendment protected, but protest is. So I'm a little disgusted. I'm a lot disgusted with how this stuff works. We always have to change our behavior. We always have to give something up. The left gives up nothing. They just push. They got into the streets after the Dobbs decision. Nationwide protests. Some of them are large numbers. To voice their displeasure. That's their right. Then why do we have to be told? Pelosi didn't tell, like I said, after the Dobbs decision, she didn't say, don't protest. No, she told them to. And Schumer, egging their people on to protest. And what are ours doing? Oh, no, stay home. You know, there's other ways to get this done. No, there's not. Look at what's going on in France. Look at what's going on in Israel, for heaven's sakes. In France, President Macron trying to change the pension system, just moving the age from 62 to 65. 1 million people took to the streets in protest. 1 million people. You couldn't get 1 million people to protest in the United States on anything. Our side couldn't anyway. We couldn't get 10,000. And in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu trying to change their court structure. Mass protest. Sri Lanka, 250,000 people circled the presidential capital, protesting election results. They had to airlift the president out of there. 250,000 in the streets. That's the battlefield. That's how you get public attention. That's how you get government officials' attention. So I'm disappointed in this. Very disappointed that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy would sit up there and tell us, don't exercise your constitutional right. We don't need this. I think they're afraid of January 6th. Because every time we do it, the left brings up January 6th. Insurrection. That wasn't an insurrection. It was an event that got out of hand. There's no doubt about that. We got to stop this stuff. We have to stop killing ourselves on this. We're going to get the Justice Department, the Democrats, to stop using the Justice Department to go after political opponents. They're going to continue to do it. And not only are they going to go after Trump and others coming for you next. Attention, Patriots. Looking for a great book? Let me recommend The Greatest Story Ever Told. The We the People Bible is available for the first time in history. This Bible is for those who believe it is time to give America back to God. Faith is being targeted, and our country's founding beliefs are being targeted. The We the People Bible is restoring what there is an attempt to remove: the preservation of faith and the preservation of America. One of the most unique features of this Bible is that it includes the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the Pledge of Allegiance as a bonus. This makes it a perfect heirloom to pass on to the generations to come. It is time to give America back to God, and this Bible is a great way to do just that. Get one for yourself and another as a gift for a friend or family member. Go to americasheriff.com and click on the Bible link to order today while supplies last. Friends, I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of Straight Talk with yours truly, America Sheriff David Clarke. And a special thank you also goes out to our sponsors. My goal, as always, is to break down these complex and many times controversial issues and bring it to you straight with a little dose of common sense, no media bias, no talking points, just truth. And this podcast would not be possible without your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite place to listen. And please share this message of common sense nonsense on social media. For more content, be sure to follow me on Truth Social, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And just a reminder, we'd love for you to join our Straight Shooters VIP podcast club for only $5 per month. And with that membership, you'll receive invitations to attend private podcast events throughout the year as a VIP guest when we come to your town. Plus, if you join today, you'll also receive a free coffee mug and a sample of our private label coffee as long as supplies last. Subscribe and join at americasheriff.com. This podcast is brought to you by americasheriff.com with executive producer Judy Wilkinson of JLWilkinsonConsulting and producer Josh Wentz in partnership with our friends at Bulldog Media. If you are interested in partnering with Straight Talk Podcasts or having me speak in your area, please contact Judy at JLWilkinsonConsulting@gmail.com, 706-518-2116. That's JLWilkinsonConsulting@gmail.com. Phone number 706-518-2116.